Okay, so listen, I'm going to take a few minutes to make a few housekeeping announcements. But before that, I'm going to also do something that is upside down, because I'm dedicating this to Ambassador Chinoy's book, which will later be presented to the Sherpa, World Upside Down. So I'm going to start with the vote of thanks rather than a welcome address. I'm going to turn the world upside down. And my vote of thanks is to all of you. All of you, over the last 8 months, we've had 8 months. That's it. It's an 8-month year that we're really talking about. First of all, despite the grueling schedule that we have, in a sense, maintained through these 8 months, over 200 of you from 33 countries have turned up. So I think that's a fantastic testimony to the importance of this kind of a gathering, of this community, the growing interest in the work that we do. And I want to thank all of you for coming here and joining us in Mysore, where we have actually tailored a boutique weather for you. A little bit of monsoons, a little bit of sunshine, but certainly fair weather all throughout. So enjoy your time here, and thank you so much for joining us, all 200 of you from 33 countries who are here. But please, you should always applaud yourself. No one else will do it. But more importantly, I am a bit of a number evangelist. I like numbers. I come from the private sector. I was spoiled for chasing targets. I had promised myself that when I meet you again today, I'm going to report to you that we have crossed 300 policy briefs in the last 8 months. And this is because of you. Again, because of you. It has taken 1,000 authors, 706 institutions from 75 countries with 45% women authors to produce 302 policy briefs. So please join me in applauding yourself for making this happen. The T20 has also hosted 64 events in person in 16 cities in India and 6 cities overseas. We have had a physical event in every continent of this world. Elon Musk will take us to Mars, but till then, we have done the best we could. So please join me in applauding yourself. Your participation, your partnerships, I don't want to name all of you, but many of you have led this effort to make sure that this is a global community that we are building. Your generosity, your sponsorships, your partnerships, your ability to host in Europe, in South America, in Africa, in other parts. Thank you so much for making the Indian T20 special, and we have certainly circumnavigated the world. But we are not done yet. We are still 8 months into the presidency. We still have 4 months left. So stay tuned for some other propositions that we are going to put before you in New Delhi, in New York, in Dubai, in Cape Town, and in Rio. So before we are done, Rosario and Delhi and Mysuru distance is going to look small. We have some more travel time for you, Gladys. So please keep tuned to the website, to the T20 website, and to our emails, because we are proposing to do much more over the next few months. We are not done yet. Now, I think I don't want to save it for the last, and I want to start with this. I really think that we should start this conference by applauding 32 unnamed individuals who comprised the T20 Secretariat and made all of this possible. The faceless, nameless souls who have worked day and night to keep the trains running on time. I think we should give them a warm round of applause. They made this happen. I also want you to applaud the chairs and the co-chairs of the task forces. We have produced 7 task force recommendations. This is a first in T20 journey. We are going to be releasing 7 task force recommendations in full. We are not diluting them. And of course, we have a task force we have a main communique of the G20, which the International Advisory Board put together. But to make this happen, please join me in applauding not just the leadership of everyone in this room, but 2 specific and special individuals of the Indian G20 presidency, the chair of the core group, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, and of course, the Don Johnson of Indian G20, Sachin Chaturvedi. Now, with this, I am ending my vote of thanks. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for making the time and the effort to come to Mysuru, which is a brilliant, beautiful city. And I'm now going to move to the business end. And to do that, I'm going to call on stage people who are leading many of these conversations that have happened in the past 8 months and are going to be shaping the ones that are ahead of us. So let me first invite Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Chair of T20 Core Group, and Director General Manohar Parrikar, Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. Ambassador Chinoy, please join us on stage. Can I invite Luciana Servo, President of IPIA, Brazil? You have an interesting year ahead of you, Luciana. Let me invite Professor Bambang from Indonesia, who was the chair. And I'm going to ask you, Professor, if you are okay, if you are happy with our progress. You gave us the baton, are we doing okay? So you have to judge us. Okay. Yeah? And of course, let me invite my friend Elizabeth from SIA. Elizabeth, please join me on stage as well. And we are going to talk to you about the communique that is going to be released post this discussion. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Chinoy. And I'm going to basically ask you your key takeaways, impressions, and assessments of what we have done together in the past 8 months, and certainly sitting today as we release the communique, your perspectives that we can all benefit from.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Samir Saran, and I want to thank particularly each one of you for finding the time to be with us over here at our grand finale in Mysore for the T20 Summit, and especially members of the International Advisory Board as well. 8 months, it has been a memorable journey for me, and as Dr. Saran just informed you, 300 issue papers, 1,000 authors. So there's obviously a great deal of ferment in the T20, many new ideas, suggestions and recommendations, and these have found their way into the T20 communique. They've also found their way into the communiques of each of the 7 task forces. But if I were to summarize briefly some of the key issues, and this is simply skimming the surface, you know much better about these issues. The first for me would be the recommendation for the G20 for macroeconomic stability remaining an abiding precondition and priority for economic recovery and inclusive economic growth. And this obviously means that the T20 has successfully identified a number of avenues for the G20 to consider for coordinating its monetary, fiscal, trade, and investment policies. Second, the T20, in my view, more than any other in the past, has underscored the importance of the digital economy as a unique chance to advance the SDGs as well. And this flows from, again, in my view, India's huge success with regard to digital public infrastructure and the India stack, as such that we've been able to extend the benefits of digital economy to millions of people, and we are now willing to share this with the rest of the world. A number of countries like France, Singapore, the UAE have already shown great interest. And I do believe that an inclusive DPI would also make for extending better healthcare around the world. 3, the uniqueness of the Think 20 lies in steering our discourse towards the pressing challenge of climate change and environment protection, and particularly the linkage between the two. And we have succeeded in offering practical solutions, in my view, for responsible consumption through the Lifestyle for Environment mission, which is, as you all know, an idea of the Prime Minister of India. It's been further refined by each one of you, I dare say. The Indian Presidency, the 4th point, has laid great stress on the need for global climate governance and especially enabling developing countries achieve their goals with regard to energy security. So this lies at the heart of the issue, energy security, energy sustainability, and energy access. And above all, the Presidency has highlighted the urgent need for a just and inclusive energy transition. 5th point, another success this year is our bringing back into focus the importance of the 2030 SDG agenda, especially gender equality and women-led development. It is a cause of major concern, as far as I'm concerned, that at the halfway mark between 2015 and 2030, only 12% of the SDGs have actually been achieved. 6, our work has successfully focused on reimagining the global financial architecture, especially the structure and functioning of MDBs and IFIs. But without commensurate and adequate capital, including low-cost hybrid finance, I would venture to say that it will be very difficult to achieve any kind of results on any major collective goal. 7, and this is the second last one, an adjunct of this is our thrust on reimagining multilateralism. The dysfunctionality in the multilateral order suggests that we make even greater efforts to reform the UN-led structures, not reject nor confront them. This is very important. We need to seek to better them, not to oppose the existing structures. 8, and this is really the last point, in a world beset with confrontation and polycrisis, the need of the hour is to have an inclusive and representative dialogue to address common challenges. And that is why Think 20 has recommended that the G20 should permanently include regional associations from underrepresented regions of the world, in particular the African Union. So this, in my view, is the broad summary of what I think we've all achieved together. And I'm sure that the co-panelists will have much more to add on this. So thank you very much, Dr. Samir Saran, for bringing us to this point where we are extremely happy to be in Mysore. It's been very successful and very memorable. And the credit also goes to your hardworking secretariat. Thank you.
So, Ambassador Chinoy, I'll come back to you, but let me now turn to Professor Bambang and actually ask him the question. How do you assess the priorities that we have put forth in this year, connecting to what had happened in Indonesia? And do they, in many ways, take forward the efforts that you had put in through your team in the previous year? That's one part of it. And of course, the report card. Since you are the elder and you are now assessing our performance, your thoughts on the last 8 months.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the T20 India for hosting the summit and for all the hospitality and arrangement for participants. So, looking at the T20 Communique India, I believe the priority of the topics that have been launched very much similar and also continuation. A very excellent continuation from what has been discussed in Indonesia T20 chairmanship or presidency. And it could happen because I think two things. First, of course, Indonesia and India are basically in the same group in the G20. We are emerging economies and with relatively a significant amount of population, and we also have quite similar development issues. So we always share our empathy for low-income countries, developing economy issues. So that's why the resolution or the priorities in the T20 Communique India very much reflecting what has been discussed and has been strengthened by 8 months discussion during T20 India. The second reason why the continuation has been excellent is because India T20 has been very much involved when we host the T20 in Indonesia. I remember participation from the very first meeting at that time still online for the inception, and finally in our T20 Summit, we still remember the significant presence of India delegation of the T20. And of course, another aspect is the very much, a very good collaboration with the T7. If you remember, of course, the T7 is the first T7 in Germany. And with the T7 Germany, led by Dr. Dennis Nower and Anna Katarina, I think they have been very much helpful, not only to work with us to discuss issues of our common interest, But more importantly, we can understand each other, that sometimes the issues that overlooked by T7 needs to be revitalized or reinstated by the T20. And I believe the T7 communique and T20 communique ideally should be complementing one to the other, because we know that, of course, T7 has its own agenda, T20 as well, and T20 is, of course, should reflect the voice from the developing and low-income economy. So in general, if you ask me whether we are very much happy that we already passed the baton to India, yes, and it happens on the very smooth way. And of course, we thank the leadership of Ambassador Chinoy, Dr. Sachin, and other Indian leaders of the T20 for their enthusiasm during the T20 Indonesia especially, and also the way the India T20 trying to involve other countries. I think the key success of T20, and I think this will be relevant for Brazil and South Africa in the 2 years ahead, is trying to be as inclusive as possible. And I like what Ambassador Chinoy just mentioned, trying to engage the regions that might be underrepresented, both in the, of course, the G7, or G20, as well as the T20. And I believe this kind of spirit needs to be enhanced by the next presidency of Brazil and South Africa. So at the end, we will have think tank community that not only dominated by few countries, but it will be more inclusive and it will be better in analyzing and understanding the issues, especially in low income and developing economy.
Professor, I think you have very rightly pointed out two individuals who also must be applauded for their service to this community. Dennis Noor and Anna, both of them are here, and thank you very much for your service to the community and building a bridge that brings people together. I think that's a very important role, and hopefully many of us will contribute even further in the days ahead. And I can already see Elizabeth with that look on her face that you ain't seen nothing yet. Come to South Africa and we'll show you the super infrastructure for connecting humans. But I'm going to just come to Elizabeth in a bit. Let me turn to Luciana. Luciana, Brazil, next year. So your take on the priorities that we have outlined in the communique, and what is the Brazilian samba or the twist that's going to be added to this this project that in many ways I call the IDSA, the Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa project, or rather Elizabeth in a South African accent stumbled on the right pronunciation. So how do you take this forward in Brazil?
First, thank you also for your hospitality, to being amazing since the day we arrived. Not before the day we arrived, you organized everything for us to be here. And so I thank you very much, the India team, for this hospitality and the invitation to be here. Well, for sure you have, not only for the T20, but the G20 takeaway, that is, we have a global South presidents for 4 countries, yes, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. And this is important because this brings the priorities of the developed countries to the agenda. And this makes a lot of the problems and the actions necessary to face the problems of these countries in the global order, like the accelerating the SDGs, as Mr. Chinoy has said. And we have problems in this context that we're seeing some problems in behind in the SDGs agenda. We also have to go forward in the financing the necessary investments to enable just ecological transition to contribute to global objectives of controlling global warming, but also to foster development and reducing inequalities. I think it's quite important agenda that has been put in the communique, and also how we are going to make the SDG 10 important and structural part of the agenda. But for the T20, I think the Indonesia and India have set the bar very high for us, because you have an inclusive process of a lot of think tanks. Mm-hmm. And as has been said here, I think we have to embrace this process to bring more think tanks to the debate, and also doing this inclusive process with the South Africans and also with Latin American think tanks, and doing this dialogue between think tanks of all regions so that we can embrace the process of this that has been done through the entire process of the T20.
And any Brazilian addition that you can share with us right now, or is it too early to give us a sneak peek on your agenda for?
No, I think we're going to have some pretty strong quote on like the inequalities and poverty and hunger agenda. That is quite important for Brazil, but not only for Brazil, it's been part of this agenda. The gender equality is also an important part of the agenda. The multilateralism reform of the multilateral system is also part of the agenda in Brazil. I think they're also accelerating the SDGs is quite important for Brazil also. We don't have what we call the G20 agenda yet. We hope to have this by September, earlier than we thought, but it's not yet ready. So we have to do a communication between the G20 and the T20. So that's why we're not announcing all the teams that we're going to work with, because we want to see which topics the G20 will bring, the new ones, so that we can establish a dialogue between the T20 and the G20, and a close dialogue between these two processes, maintaining the independence of the T20, of course.
Luciana, I'm going to ask you a question which I'm also going to pose to Elizabeth in a bit. The BRICS, and South Africa is currently the chair of the BRICS. They are going to hand over to the Russians next year, and thereafter it moves to the Brazilians. So basically you're going to be moving from your G20 presidency to your Brazilian presidency. The Brazilians are going to be having back-to-back leadership roles on these two. And how important are these different plurilateral groups, BRICS, IPSA, G20, in the manner in which you will design your agenda? Do they complement each other, or do we see different sets of issues that we take forward in these groups?
For sure, we are also debating about we have the BRICS think tanks. We are talking with them and have the agenda of the BRICS think tanks, the IPSA, and bringing these institutions to dialogue. We'll do a more inclusive and even maybe structure a dialogue that's quite difficult nowadays. Yes. So I think we're in the process of building the T20 agenda in Brazil, we are going to establish some links with these also other organizations. But not only with these organizations from the Global South, but also with the regional organizations from the South American and Latin American either. And this regional look and this international look, this Global South look will be quite important, as it has been here in India and in Indonesia, but we want to enhance this dialogue with BRICS and IPSA, for sure.
So I think there are two words in our theme for this panel discussion: continuity and cooperation. I think three of our speakers have emphasized on both of these aspects quite clearly. Let me turn to Elizabeth and ask you three questions as part of one question. Your perspectives on our communique, but more importantly, your perspectives on the communique from African continent viewpoint. If you are in that continent, have you seen a gradual increase in issues and themes and topics that are more relevant to the continent? What is missing? Either we can sit down and compliment ourselves that we have created a great inclusive tent, or we can also strive to do better. So maybe some thoughts on what could be done differently in the Brazilian presidency and in your own presidency to make it even more strong, the idea of inclusive growth and diverse voices. And finally, how does, if we were to assume, just for this particular conversation, that African Union is now a member, then how does South Africa reconfigure its own role in the G20? Because one of its previous roles was also to be, in many ways, the ambassador for the union in some manner of speaking. So what is it going to mean for South Africa when you have an African Union coming into the fray?
Okay, let me start with the first question. I think what we have seen, certainly even going back to the Indonesian presidency, is the bringing to the fore in the G20 context of the development dimensions. Very early on in the G20's life, at least at a leader summit, I think there was the realization of the importance of, if we're talking about global financial stability and recovery, et cetera, we need to also think about the most vulnerable countries in the world. And already then in 2010, 2011, we had the Seoul Development Consensus and so on. But I think there have been ebbs and flows in the emphasis on development. And certainly countries from the Global South have a very particular interest and commitment to that in the G20, because a lot of our challenges, in order to be addressed, sure, there is a dimension that there are certain things we have to do internally and within our regions, but there are a whole range of other elements that require changes to the global superstructure, to the global system. And that's what, the G20 is supposed to be building consensus around. And so really accelerating the focus on development, certainly the SDGs, which are cross-cutting, cover a whole range of issues, even though they also in the context of the Indian presidency have a specific task force, is vitally important. And increasingly also the energy transition. And what does just mean? Great. And we know that just means different things to different people, and some people don't even want to put just in the transition. And so from an African perspective, I think these debates have begun to emerge over the last couple of presidencies. I know that certainly some of these are important issues for Brazil and most certainly for South Africa in 2025. I think just on that point, I think South Africa and Brazil often compete, but I think we're ahead of you now on the Gini coefficient. Okay, we're the most unequal country in the world. In fact, the SACU, the Southern African Customs Union countries, are the most unequal in a recent World Bank report. And so the issue of social inequalities and development has to be core to what we do. And part of that is also how we create the environment. And here I would commend India and its initiative around the roundtable on debt. How do we create the environment for more fiscal space, for an environment that doesn't penalize us for actions that haven't been ours? Whether we're talking about climate change or indeed the pandemic, so that we're in a position to not lose the 25 years of positive growth and development, which we saw in the period preceding the pandemic, but actually able to move beyond that. All the indicators, you like indicators, all the indicators show that we've regressed. And so that has to be front and center. And so these are some of the issues that I think South African presidency, it's too early yet, but would be looking at debt, social inequalities, issues of taxation, and the global tax system, which I think is very important. And then, of course, fundamentally, in the case of countries like my own, the just transition. But then in the case of most of Africa, we're also talking about adaptation and loss and damage. And those are all very important elements. So it's really taking the developmental agenda, I think every presidency takes it a notch up. Just on your second point around the AU's possible membership of the G20, we hope it happens. I think certainly South Africa has taken the position in many fora that often we're the only African voice, and so we cannot say we speak on behalf of the continent, but we can certainly say we are from the continent and therefore very aware of the challenges that the continent faces. And we use the opportunity of having a seat at the table to articulate those issues. Having an AU sitting in the G20 I think helps to enhance that and amplify that, and so that would certainly be positive. It comes with a great, I think, we will have to think also as a continent how to make sure that that seat is an effective seat. It's a seat with voice and agenda setting capacity and outcomes. And I think South Africa certainly can play a role in that, as indeed can a number of other continental organizations, most notably, of course, the AU Commission, as well as ARDA, NEPAD, and potentially, and here the African think tank community, I think, is also critical, and it's been great to see over the last several years the rise in the participation of African think tanks in the T20.
No, in fact, another individual I would like to acknowledge this evening is Dean Sanobe, someone again who's been working a lot on furthering the agenda for the Global South through his T7. Listen, I'm going to keep calling out names through the next 3 days, so all of you have to attend all the sessions. Okay, because I'm going to call your name out at some point. I have the list. So you should be there when I call your name out. But thank you, Dean Sanobe, for your efforts and for building bridges and including voices and giving them the bully pulpit sometimes to set the agenda, as you mentioned, Elizabeth. I'm going to turn to the final part of our conversation this evening. We have 2.5 to 3 minutes for each of you. Look, one of the frustrations in this part of the world is that we can come out with these communiques and outcome statements and documents, but who cares? Eventually, you go to a WTO that is run by its own bureaucracy. You go to the EU that is run by a bureaucracy. You go to the World Bank that doesn't have anyone running it. And you have these institutions that are dysfunctional or other that are committed to the ways that they've been operating for decades on. So how do we change the mode of engaging with these institutions as think tankers? Let's not put everything on the track one. What should the T20 community do to shake those who are sitting in these other institutions and make them see reason and rationale and solutions more effectively? Is there a role for us, or do we have to limit ourselves to be rooted through the track one? Should we be more proactive, or do you think we have to rely on formal institutions of our sovereigns to deal with it? So it's a moot point, and I want all of you to share your thoughts. I'll possibly start with Professor Bambang, and then I'll come to Ambassador Chinoy. You have tried, because I know you went to the WTO, you took part in discussions there. You made an effort in the Indonesian presidency. So I'll start with you, Professor.
Of course, it will be maybe complicated or maybe almost impossible if T20 can have, let's say, direct interaction with the G20 leaders. So, of course, the normal route will be either through finance track or the Sherpa track. And I think that's what we are doing. I mean, since Indonesia last year, and I believe India this year. So during the year, we are trying to engage, for example, with working group from the Sherpa track and also the working group from the finance track. But then after, learning about what happened in the last 2 years, and then my own experience back in 2011, 2016, maybe I can have like a proposal in which T20 should have direct communication, or maybe we could have something like a standing committee for certain issues that also part of the standing task force or standing working group in the G20. I remember in the finance track last year, I was invited for Sustainable Finance Working Group. And Sustainable Finance Working Group doesn't really link. It's not really linked to the host. I mean, for example, the chair is not Indonesia. Yeah, the chair is, I think, US and China as the co-chair. So, Sustainable Finance Working Group, and also there is an MDB reform committee or working group, and as well as International Financial Architecture, which has been there for quite a long time, and an infrastructure working group, I think led and run by OECD. And I also remember when Elizabeth mentioned about the tax, the working group on global tax. Now, for example, they are working on setting up the minimum tax rate. So if T20 can have at least maybe once a year direct discussion, direct communication with this, standing working group or committee from the G20, finance track and Sherpa track, I think that will be worth it. And I believe even though, of course, at the end, the decision in communique will be done by the bureaucracy, as you mentioned, but at least we can contribute something, and at least we can ensure that when they make decision, their decision at least in line with what we have discussed from think tank community. I think that could be one idea to enhance the T20 relevancy in the next Brazilian and South Africa presidency. Yeah.
But you know, to be honest here, that I think the integration between the Sherpa track and the finance track during India's presidency has been outstanding. It's been real time, it's been permanent, it's been relentless. I'm not saying that they have taken everything that we have said, or they are interested in everything that we do, but the communication is robust, and I think the Sherpa, and of course let me also acknowledge Joint Secretary Inam Gambhir, who was the points person for this engagement group, and thank you for your leadership during the year. I think the comms between us, between the formal track and the track 2. In fact, I remember some of my Brazilian colleagues asking me, what is the arrangement? I said, the arrangement is WhatsApp. When we have something to share and when they need something from us, we are on tap. It's a real-time, on-tap discussion that's happening. We also have monthly formal communication engagements. We also have specialized groups that meet. But there is a multi-tiered, in India at least, we were able to create a robust. But my question, Ambassador Chinoy, is more about dealing with the WTOs and dealing with some of the other UN bodies. How does T20 influence thinking in those corridors? I think that was my most specific question to you.
So I think the theme itself suggests that there should be continuity. There should be cohesion, there should be cooperation. And I think we should also use the Indian context in order to give greater thrust to each of these three. As far as continuity is concerned, there is no gainsaying the fact that this Think 20, however unique it is, it's not a one-off event, that there is no dead stop here, that we are supposed to pass on the baton to the future presidencies, and issues like climate change, or, for instance, economic recovery, fiscal stability, SDGs, multilateralism, and reforms, etc. These are not going to go away. I don't think it's anyone's case that within a year, a particular presidency must show absolutely accountable outcomes. This is virtually not possible. What we have to do is to build on the foundations that have been created by previous presidencies, add our own. And India is good at this, given its own continuity of a 5,000-year-old civilization, the manner in which we have approached inclusivity, the whole principle of leaving no one behind, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. As far as cohesion is concerned, I think it's, again, vitally important that the Think 20 allows us to work together, not only among ourselves at the broadest possible level, but increasingly engage think tanks in different countries. Each year we must take stock of which countries have been left out of this process and try and include them. We must also include the youth. If we don't include the youth, then we will have a hard time justifying some of the decisions that we take. So our preamble tells us, we, the people of India. The United Nations tells us, we the peoples. India has shown the way forward in this G20 presidency by actually involving 1.4 billion people. But it's time to also involve the rest of the world in every presidency. The last bit is cooperation, which comes naturally to India in terms of the external engagement that we've had, whether it's the International Day of the Yoga, the International Day of Yoga, or the International Solar Alliance, or the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. Every one of these fields, we have shown our ability to cooperate. And I think this is something that we want to pass on as a thought, as a benchmark. As an ethic too. As an ethic. But don't forget the youth. Don't forget the girl child. Don't forget think tanks in countries that have so far not been included. Don't forget the think tanks outside of the capitals. And this is something that's vital. Thank you.
I think these are very important thoughts. Elizabeth, one of your colleagues asked me to speak on the presidency. They ambushed me at the other hotel, and I obliged because they came with your flag, they came with your insignia, and I remember telling them that, look, till Indonesia, the G20 was serving 1 billion people. Post Indonesia, we are serving the next 7 billion. And in a sense, we have to make this a organization and an institution that doesn't speak for the planet but serves every human. And I think that's the nuance we need to somehow find. So Elizabeth, over to you, and then final words to Luciana. Elizabeth, first to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's an absolutely important point, because sometimes, we have these very rarefied conversations in meetings such as these, on conferences, where people come to me afterwards. Where were you? I was at a T20 Summit, and you tell them what you discussed, and they say, so what? And the issue is how is what comes out of the G20, let's talk about the G20, actually will have an impact and has an impact on individual lives. And I think that's an important thing to consider. And when we're talking about the African continent, which is the most underrepresented, but also the one where we have a significant number of least developed countries, that's also part of the thinking and reflection in terms of of policy engagement. I think I want to make maybe two or three points. The first one, of course, is that we have these institutions, but these institutions don't operate in a vacuum. These institutions are the result of the way in which member states, because they're intergovernmental organizations, operate. When we as member states, the G20 members are members of these organizations and play a critical role, they're systemically important, allow these institutions to paralyze,
then it reflects on us.
Then it reflects on us. So I mean, that's the first point. The second one is that, of course, these institutions, not necessarily all of them, are often participating in the G20 discussions. And so the issue from a Think 20 perspective is also that our engagement group, or the people that our policy engagement, should not just be through necessarily the formal tracks that you have now, which I think is really good. It's important to have these meetings. It's because I don't think, they do not read. We've been told they do not read 300 policy briefings.
Correct.
Okay, so that immediate engagement is very critical. But at the same time, that actually a lot of the work that comes out of these think tank discussions needs to also be taken to these bodies when they meet, whether it's the UN General Assembly or the WTO or the WHO or whatever. So it's, at the end of the day, we don't take the decisions, but we can certainly be much more active at one level in terms of engaging at the intergovernmental with the institutions, and at another level, and this also speaks to the human dimension, it's engaging with communities that don't often have are not part of the conversations, but often have very strong views and ideas and good ideas, and have a very strong understanding of the context in which they have to live their lives. And I think that...
No, thank you, Elizabeth. I think you raise an important point in just sharing it with all the community members here. While, of course, by design and by our DNA, we have to defend the long form and the research element of our lives. We have to defend it, but we also have to be nimble and agile and communicate it in a manner that is digestible with those in positions to make use of it. So I think we have to play at both ends of the spectrum, defend the long form and be agile with your comms. And that's the new frontiers that...
the long form provides the evidence.
The evidence and of course, Instagram the audience. So how do you take the evidence to the audience is the million-dollar question. And we this year have tried to do it. We have tried to introduce new platforms and new constituencies. And again, I remember the Sherpa who's now joined us. So welcome, Mr. Kant. He's joined us this evening. I remember him telling me, don't give me such copious material because no leader will read it. Tell me what are the 5, 10, 15, 20 great ideas you want us to chase. And by the way, he says that I have to do the same with my colleagues and co-stakeholders. So in some sense, all of us, we struggle with time and we have an explosion of ideas, and we have to somehow find the golden median. Luciana, the final word of this panel for you, institutions.
Yes, I think that besides bringing African Union or the regional institutions, we are talking about coming some recommendations earlier in the process, like before the midterm summit of the G20, so that you can have some of our recommendations, work on it, and so you can progress from there until the end of the year, building this process with the G20 tracks. Besides that, we have to bring other engagement groups to see if the message that we putting forward their understanding as advocacy for some topics of the agenda, and also how to train the national, international think tanks that are not part of the process yet, so that they can engage in the process. So training is something that we are thinking a lot about during the Brazilian presidency, because there are some important small think tanks that works in some agendas, specific agendas, but are not trained for a global delivery, or also for a global debate, more for a regional debate. So also thinking about this training process will be quite important for us.
Great. So I think that's been a wonderful discussion to, in many ways, capture the communique, the ethic, the discussions that took place over the last 8 months, and the recommendations that are now going to be revealed. Please join me in applauding these wonderful leaders of the think tank community for their leadership and for their care.